Welcome to the Informed Pregnancy and Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, pregnancy-focused chiropractor, Dr. Elliot Berlin. My guest today is an aerospace engineer. She works at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, building and testing space instruments, and she also just had her first baby. She's here to talk about what it was like going through pregnancy, birth, and postpartum as someone living with bipolar type 1, and why she chose not to breastfeed at all because of her diagnosis. Rachel Kenney, welcome to the podcast. Well, it's nice to see you again.
You too. The last time that I saw you, we were going through our chiropractic adjustments post-birth, but I guess the first time I saw you was when I was breech.
Yes, the baby was head up, and now I assume the baby is still head up mostly.
Mostly. And she was head down for birth, which
Amazing.
was the goal, the goal indeed. So feeling really good about that part.
Yeah, I'm so glad that worked out for you.
Right.
All right. There's so much to talk about with you. I want to jump right in. Just a little quick background on you. Where are you from? What do you do? And how did you get to do that?
I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Manassas, Virginia. My own dad was a chiropractor as well.
From Staten Island.
Yes.
And I'm a chiropractor from Staten Island.
Yeah, it's wild how we have found each other.
Weird.
And he's the one that got me into space. He knew I was interested, and we went to Parent-Child Space Academy together when I was 9 years old.
What?
So
what is that like?
It was incredible. I mean, flying spaceships together when I was 9 and blasting off rockets and just doing that in Huntsville, Alabama, got me into liking space. And I think it was, history from there. It was nice to have him support me in that.
Wow. It's cool that you kind of knew that you were interested in it. It was cool that your dad picked up on it and, moved it forward for you, made that opportunity available to you. And it's cool that that's what you're doing now. It doesn't always happen that way. Some kids just have no clue what they like. And then some parents don't realize that the kids know what they like or don't have it in them to help them explore and develop in that way. That's really cool. I mean, rocket science.
Yeah, I've been out here for about 8 years, like you said, building and testing space instruments. I still find it completely fascinating now that I'm off of maternity leave and back to work. I still really like what I do, but now as a mom, I have this whole other genre of life that I've learned a lot about, and it's been great to have this whole other part of me that's come from that.
Are you one of those people that love what you do at work and won't love what you do at home?
I don't know. I mean, it might be early to say that, but I think that is a lovely goal.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about bipolar because you're open about it, which is great, I think, because I was very curious in a lot of different ways as a parent in particular, because you were diagnosed on the younger side. So tell me about your history with it. How did you find out about it? How did it manifest for you, and how do you treat it?
So I found out my first semester at MIT for undergrad. There were no signs before that, sort of like a golden child scenario. Even my mom was a psychologist. There weren't any indicators beforehand, but I had my first manic episode and was hospitalized that first semester. They say a lot of stress can bring it out. But from there, I was able to figure out the diagnosis and figure out medication that would work for me. After about 2 years of titrating off and on meds, I found lithium, which I'm still on today, about a decade later, and stayed on throughout my pregnancy. So I think figuring out I was bipolar and being able to be a high functioning bipolar person at work and in my relationships, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to go through motherhood and become a parent, but with a lot of support, I've figured out how to do it so far. And so now, about 4 months after birth, still bipolar and still okay. So I'm feeling really pleased that I can say that.
Is there something that one would look for in themselves or in their kids for clues? I know you didn't really have any, but now that you're more experienced with it.
I think I would look for the genetic side of things, maybe seeing if anyone in the family had it. There can be environmental factors that lead to it, like a lot of stress can bring it out. For me, there weren't any family indicators or clear signs that I was likely to get it. So I would probably recommend looking at sleep If there's issues with sleeping, that was a big leading sign that something wasn't okay with me. With mania, it's a lot of feeling euphoric or high if there's a lot of ups and downs that seem more extreme and more of a long duration, then it's just good to talk to a professional and see if there's something that could be done. My main phrase is, it doesn't have to be this hard. If things are feeling like a roller coaster, there are ways to make it feel more stable.
In terms of your experience, what does it feel like for you unmedicated, like the experience of each of the phases of bipolar?
When I was going through those initial 2 years of figuring out what meds would work well for me, I was feeling more depressed in the spring and more manic in the fall. And that's just the rhythm that I personally had. Sometimes people have it more on like a weekly cycle or a monthly cycle. But for me, it was sort of revolving around those seasons and just feeling more depressed. It's so hard to talk about when you're not in it, but feeling down for me just was not wanting to do things and just wanting to stay more in bed to a point where it was getting in the way of normal life. And so when I am on lithium, I am very stable, and it's sort of been this miracle of figuring out, hey, maybe my brain chemistry was off and I need some help. And so when I am on it, I am feeling more normal. I get regular emotions and I can tell if I need to up or lower the dose with my psychiatrist, but it is something that is very manageable. And I was able to do a lot of looking into what I could do to become a mom with it.
It's great that you're able to manage it. And it sounds like over time you've really developed an understanding of how to keep it at bay.
Definitely. I did figure out I would have to go off it. You mentioned unmedicated. The recommendation is to try and not be on it when I was going through labor. And so there were several days in my birth story that I was not on lithium, which led to just some interesting things with my family knowing that I wasn't on it, and how I looked and how I felt and what made that part of my birth story different when it came to my birth plan and what I actually told the doctors.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a little break. When we come back, we'll talk about how you planned for the pregnancy or the research that you did on pregnancy with the condition, with the medication, and same for postpartum. And then we'll get your actual birth story and find out where those elements come in. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking to Rachel Kenney, new mom and aerospace engineer. Fascinating person. I do feel very lucky that I got to hang out with you a lot, at least for the end of your pregnancy. Let's talk about this. So in terms of planning for pregnancy, birth, postpartum with bipolar that's under control with lithium, there's a lot to think about. What kind of information did you get? What went into your planning?
A few years prior to deciding to have a kid or to try to have a kid, I talked to some professionals about what it would mean to be on lithium while pregnant. I had found out through some experimenting with my psychiatrist that I need to be on lithium to be stable. And so because of that, I found out that it was possible for a baby's heart to not be formed correctly if a mom is on lithium during pregnancy. And so because of that risk, I found out that if I were to try and have a baby, I would find out if the heart was viable during the pregnancy, maybe a little later than I would like. And so in that planning process, I found out that risk, that's the number one big risk. I worked with my partner, my husband, to figure out if we even wanted to have kids, especially from a climate activism perspective. So going through all of the bipolar side of things and our relationship, we made the decision to try and have a kid.
Okay. And then was trying difficult? Did it take long?
No, I actually had a copper IUD for 10 years. I had the copper one because it doesn't have any hormones, so it wouldn't mess with my lithium. I took that out because it was around the expiration date. And then 2 months later, found out I was pregnant. I was in a state where I wasn't trying really hard with my partner, but also not trying not to. And so it was just really amazing to find out that I was pregnant. It was because I was working on my thyroid, which is just a separate issue for me. And my endocrinologist said, you're 5 days late on your period. I don't think you can prove to me right now that you're not pregnant. And so I went home and took a test, and it just lit up immediately.
Lo and behold.
Right.
So during the pregnancy, did you have to adjust the lithium?
Yes, I was able to make it as low as possible for me. After that experiment that I mentioned, I figured out a certain amount of milligrams that was too low for me. So I kind of had a sweet spot that I figured out. And especially in the first trimester, when all the organs are forming, that was when I wanted to have it the lowest. So I was able to kind of work through my medication, all while not knowing that the heart was okay. So I didn't actually figure that part out until 21 weeks. And so, in the preparation, I was aware of that risk and going through stuff with my thyroid, trying to figure things out. But honestly, mentally, I was really in a good place. So I was, ready and stable relationship, and just kind of had all the resources possible professionally to help me plan for it.
That must have been crazy nerve-wracking 21 weeks.
I know, right? I mean, that's like half of the pregnancy, not knowing. I think I actually surprised myself with how calm I was because I was aware of the risks, and I knew that if something wasn't okay, we would be able to find it. I think that my worry was, what if there was something that I didn't find out until birth? I was under the impression that I'd be able to find out about the baby's heart at a good point, before the possible termination time here in California. I mean, if the baby was not going to live, 21 weeks is getting closer to pushing it. So I think knowing that I lived in California and being able to have all of the professionals guiding the process, especially because it's a high-risk pregnancy, really helped ease my mind, just knowing that there would be a solution, even if it was a long wait.
It makes me nervous. But I already know the ending, and thankfully everything worked out. How was the different stages of pregnancy in your mind and body?
In my mind and body, pregnancy was wonderful. I really was enjoying it. I was able to work out and still go to work and still feel like myself. I felt like, wow. I mean, I think that as a woman and deciding to have a kid, I feel so, privileged to have like a special, healthy pregnancy. I feel like I could have decided not to try, but I feel like I personally would have been missing out. I liked the feeling of, the first kicks and going through everything. By the end, I felt like I could keep going. So that was really nice for me. I mean, what a surprise. It could have gone anyway, but I felt really fortunate.
I'm glad that it worked out. I mean, the look in your eye, the glow, the glint, when you talk about it, it kind of makes me feel like I want to try that.
Right. And then getting to finding out what the word breech means and having an upside down baby and going through the spinning babies methods and just trying things. I mean, at that point in time, I was already knowing that I wanted to work with a doula, Stephanie Enton, in the preparation. And so my husband, Stephanie, and I were a solid team, and my dog. The four of us were doing yoga and preparing and figuring out, how to try and have this magical natural birth. And then the breech concept comes up that, hey, maybe there's going to be a C-section, and how to grapple with that mentally when we've been working so hard towards a goal together. I think just all those little steps and milestones that we reached throughout the pregnancy, it's just nice to look back at them now. It does feel like a long time ago, even though it was not that long ago.
Yeah, I mean, so much changes right after the baby comes that the rearview mirror, things are closer than they appear.
Right,
They
right.
start to seem ages ago, even though it wasn't that long. What was the planning for birth like?
We knew that, and by we, I mean, my husband and working with Stephanie, we knew that we wanted to try and labor as much as possible at home, but then have a hospital birth. It's possible to have lithium withdrawal symptoms in a baby that's been inside of a mom that's on lithium. And so that part felt really important to me, to have the help of the hospital, even though the plan was to try and have as much of the labor at home. So that was the initial plan and what our birth plan was based off of.
So, as natural as possible, but in the hospital in case the baby needed support for lithium withdrawal. What would that look like?
It's said that the baby might be lethargic or just show more signs that would appear within the first 2 days. So it wouldn't be something that the parents would have to worry about when they go home, but something that could be monitored by doctors there. So in that case, we already knew that the NICU team would be stationed in our room because of the nature of the high risk pregnancy and the fact that the mom's on lithium. And so there were just some documented signs that could be lessened by not taking lithium 24 to 48 hours before the birth. I knew that if it was this magical natural birth that we were planning for, I could take my lithium at 9 p.m. at night and then start labor at 10 p.m. at night. And that's something that the high risk perinatologist and my psychiatrist said, don't worry about that. We're going to just try the best we can to not have as much lithium in the system as the baby is being born. And so that was sort of what went into the planning.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that once you went off the lithium, things got interesting.
Yes. The birth plan kind of went out the window, which is so almost entertaining to hear people say that often, that what the well-laid plans didn't come to fruition. I ended up having a planned lithium stoppage because I was getting closer to 42 weeks, very comfortable pregnant, not dilated at all, just a very hard 0 centimeters for a while. And so weighing the risks, and especially with the high risk pregnancy, just trying to figure out what I wanted. I ended up going through acupuncture and all these sorts of things to try and help encourage the timeline along. But the baby had their plans. I don't know. Do you have a phrase for that you say, like that the baby comes out when the baby wants to come out?
I mean, they're on their own timeline.
Yeah.
And I guess my phrase for that is not all cookies bake in 24 minutes. And you want them when they're fully baked, not when 24 minutes go by. So
Right.
I was just recalling the end of pregnancy for you in sort of stark contrast to most people, because usually around 36, 37 weeks, people are just like, put a fork in me. I'm done. I'm ready to have this baby. You look like you could go play pickleball, or, you had a lot of energy. You were moving great. You looked almost comfortable and super healthy. It was interesting. I remember making a note of that in my mind.
Right. The joke was, she's got a long torso, so there's a lot of room going on in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it just feels like kind of wild to look back at that time and that feeling and that decision to go through induction at the hospital when it almost seemed like things were good and there were no signs that mom or baby were needing an eviction. And so I think weighing the risks and having the high risk pregnancy allowed me to make that decision, even though it was really hard and wasn't what we had been planning. And so I think it did end up being the plan. From the decision to do induction after planning to have all of this, hard work with our doula at home, that was probably the toughest part, I think. But once I made that decision, I knew I had to stick with it. And so not having lithium was a bonus to that. The induction process for first-time moms is allegedly sometimes 2 to 3 days long. And that was pretty true for me. I was in there 2 to 3 days. I think it was about 44 hours from the first cervical softener pill that I took.
So not just allegedly anymore.
Right. It was confirmed. And I'm glad that someone told me that going in, because I would have been, just absolutely blown away to find out that, just taking these 3 cervical softener pills is 12 hours. And then at the end of it, I'm still pretty much 0 centimeters,
Pills that you took by mouth or vaginal?
I took the pills by mouth. The OB could have ordered the pills by mouth or vaginal. They happened to do the pills by mouth. That's their usual go-to.
And then
for
nothing.
Them.
Your cervix was not responsive.
Right. And so I ended up being someone that the balloon was suggested for. Instead of layering on different methods, it was recommended to try the balloon first and then Pitocin later. So I did do the balloon. That was probably the most painful part of labor. Spoiler, there was an epidural later that I think allowed me to think that the balloon insertion was actually the most painful part. For me, it was about 45 minutes. They said...
Place the balloon?
Yeah, they said it was the longest they'd ever seen it take.
Wow. Is that because your cervix was so shut?
Yes, they said it was like a fingertip dilated. But I think that they also said that's sort of a subjective term. Whose fingertip and what part of the fingertip.
I have big fingers. That might be 3 centimeters.
I know. I know. That's a perfect example of why it's subjective. And so they said, sometimes people are on morphine or fentanyl when they're doing the balloon insertion, but because I still had my birth plan that had originally been aiming for this natural birth, it had said, no big drugs. Like, it's always better for me to do the epidural because it's localized rather than putting other things through my whole system. And so it would have been potentially better to be on that at that point, but it wasn't even a discussion because it was laid out clearly on the birth plan. But
by you.
Yeah, I had already advocated for myself against this.
I'm going to say that in my doula days, I definitely have witnessed the Foley balloon placement all over the map. Some people seem to not even know it's happening, like it's effortless and almost painless. And for some people, it seems agonizing. And I don't know fully what causes the difference from one person to the next, but I've seen one in particular sticks out for me, a very, very strong, tough person with the same birth plan that you had. And for some reason, she was just incredibly sensitive to the placement of the balloon. So I don't know. But, you are also an incredibly tough person. So for you to describe it that way means to me that it was very, very intense. All right. So now I'm all in suspense, but we need to take a little break. And when we come back, we'll find out how the rest of induction and birth went and postpartum also. We'll be right back. We are back with Rachel Kenney, and we had this excruciating balloon placed, all of us. What happens next?
Well, I will say that I would, if I decide to go through birth again, I would consider a balloon again if I knew if I was more dilated first. That would be my go-to. I was then able to start Pitocin, and there were contractions being encouraged at that point. The balloon was eventually removed, which caused my water to break.
Oh, wow.
During the removal.
Removed because you hit 4 centimeters?
removed because it was the end of its time.
Yeah,
It was
4 centimeters.
it was like another 12 hours, and the expectation was 4 centimeters. But I had noted down in my notes that at that time, when they removed the balloon, it was pretty disheartening because it was expected to be at least 3 to 4 centimeters dilated, but I was only 1 to 2 after the
Oh, really?
balloon.
After they took it out and your water broke.
Yeah. So I think, it was supposed to be, it depends on how much they fill the balloon with how much cc's. And so it was filled to a point where it was expected to be 3 to 4. It was only 1 to 2. At that point, the water broke and there were signs of meconium that had been passed in the womb from the baby. And so we essentially went through another half day of waiting around to get to that 4 centimeters. They guessed it was only a 25% chance of having a vaginal delivery
Oh,
at
wow.
this point, just because of how slowly it was going. And the water was already broke and there was meconium. Like there were so many factors at this point that made it look like a low likelihood. And there was a time limit that I was given, like, hey, you have 2 hours until we're going to do a C-section if you agree. And let's just see what you can do. So with the doula, I was able to do some different positions using gravity, sitting up on top of the bed. And I just miraculously got to 6 to 7 centimeters. It was groundbreaking. And we were able to say, hey, no C-section at this point. Because of the meconium and the water breaking, some different variables were at play. I started a fever, so there were antibiotics. I think there were just a lot of moments that everyone, and myself included, thought there'd be a C-section. But after about those, 44 hours, I got to 10 centimeters. So it was like, let's go. I had the epidural. I was preparing to push.
That must have been super energizing considering, the odds were so stacked against you.
Right. I was laying on the hospital bed making a playlist for my C-section because I was just thinking that I wanted to be mentally prepared for that. But I got to 10 centimeters. This was actually on my birthday. So people were, placing bets if the baby would come on my birthday. It's actually the 4th of July. So, they're talking about
Oh, a lot of
fireworks.
birthdays.
Yeah, the doctor came back from, 4th of July party and I was already crowning. I was going. I mean, it was great. I had, waves crashing in the background. I had a nice hypnobirthing playlist going and it was just really fast and effective and empowering. So, I mean, after 44 hours, I think pushing was approximately 20 minutes. It was just so liberating. And I couldn't believe it was a vaginal delivery at that point. But I think, going back to lithium, I was several days off of my meds. So when figuring out if I was going to do a C-section, my mental health was part of the consideration. Like, okay, it's been 3-4 days now that she's been off of her meds. How are we going to do this? I felt strong and I was able to speak up for how I was doing mentally. And so at that point, the whole NICU team was in the room and there actually weren't any lithium withdrawal symptoms noted in the end, probably because of the lack of lithium in my system that
been
helped.
Off it for a while. I mean, wow.
Yeah. And, something separate from my lithium story, but, crucial to the birth story, the baby was born and didn't cry. And so it turned out to be a, meconium plug. And we needed the NICU team there for something completely unrelated to my lithium, but ended up being such a wonderful blessing that they were in the room because they went ahead and intubated her after being born. And so she's okay now and perfectly healthy. And we've gone through testing and she went through the NICU. But because of my lithium, we had the whole crew ready for something that didn't actually happen. But it was, amazing to have so many people
for
there.
Something else. Yeah. We have a word for it in Hebrew, but I don't know how you say it in English. Hashgacha pratis, we call it. Someone was looking out for you.
Exactly.
Okay, so you had the baby. Now getting back on lithium. Was it an option to breastfeed while on lithium, or is that not really an option? Was it a choice?
I'd call it a choice. There's differing opinions that I've heard. I'd heard that, for me with lithium, I do need to take blood tests. It's one of the few mental health meds that you take a blood test to see if your blood is in a certain therapeutic range and making sure that it's working for you. So it's possible that the baby would need to take blood tests and would be getting lithium through the breast milk. And apart from the lithium aspect, just the mental health for me with bipolar I, sleep is critical. So waking up every few hours to either pump or breastfeed was considered by one of the lactation consultants I talked to a bigger deal than the lithium itself. So making sure that I could have sleep and be able to recuperate during postpartum was a big consideration. So it was a choice not to breastfeed, and I never did. I never have.
Okay, so knowing that you weren't going to breastfeed, what kind of planning did you do? Because, you give birth to your baby and your body starts making milk. What sort of planning did you do for yourself and also for the baby?
I actually felt like there are more unknowns surrounding this than the birth itself for me, because so many people that I know or encounter have at least tried breastfeeding. And so this decision to not breastfeed from the get-go was something I was able to find a little Reddit community of other people that, for whatever reason, mental health or medications, have decided not to. So I think looking at that community, it was helpful to see different posts. And I read up a lot on what you can do and talked to my OB. And so I knew that there was kind of a recipe that I would aim for and just see how it goes. For me, that included wearing a tight sports bra. I had heard of binding, tightly around the breasts. I ended up trying that. It provided some relief, but a lactation consultant said it's no longer a recommended practice anymore.
Did they say why?
Um, I don't know. I'm not sure. I just sort of thought, okay, well, it's kind of a pain to do, and I'm okay with just trying other things.
Well, you said it provided relief from what? Were you getting engorged?
So I was getting engorged. I'd say day 5 after pregnancy, I was the most engorged, like so full. I almost think I would have had a pretty decent supply, or at least in that initial day, because of how much I felt like I had. There was also the recommendation to use cold cabbage. So I just feel like my family would just find pieces of cabbage around because I was just leaving a trail of, you're allegedly supposed to break the stems of the cabbage, and that's supposed to release something. It's like I make a list, and even if it's a placebo effect, I still want to try it. I did tell you about the Cabo cream, the
Yes.
cabbage breast cream. I found that online. That was just me, like lurking around looking for things, and it felt good. And I think it was much easier than actual cabbage. I wasn't leaving a trail behind me when I was putting this cabbage cream on. But yeah, it's, Cabo cream. I would probably recommend that to other people that are trying to stop breastfeeding or trying to never start. Either way.
Lactating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, so you put it on, you feel some instant relief?
Yeah, it felt cooling. And, online it had some good reviews from other people who felt the same. So I felt like I'd kind of found this hack that was fun and wouldn't involve real cabbage. Same with ice packs, though. Ice packs were recommended. I feel like I tried various sizes. I had some favorites like circular little gel ice packs. And Sudafed is recommended. And I think that's maybe more common. I've heard of that from other folks, but it was like every 4 hours, Sudafed. They said no expressing, and that's like in bold. I saw it in bold, all caps on one of my sheets from my OB. Like, don't let the milk out. Don't stimulate.
Right. Don't stimulate more production.
Right. And so eventually, by day 5 time frame, leaking actually provided relief and that I wasn't doing that. I was just leaking on my own. And I was like, whew, you know, thank goodness, because it's been trying to come out. Like mint and sage hot tea is also recommended.
Did you have the
Another,
urge to express?
um, I had the urge to, I think just instinctively, I feel like I wanted the pain to go away. So that just felt like a solution. The pain for me only lasted those few days, but it was so strong that it actually was overwhelming and got worse when I looked at my baby or touched my baby.
That's what I was wondering. Like, usually that stimulates a letdown.
Right, right. And so I kind of had I don't know, a set of real talks with my care team, which in that point was my mom and my husband, saying, hey, there is this brand new, beautiful baby, and it really hurts to look and touch her. Can you provide more skin to skin right now while I'm trying to handle myself? And I think, like, looking back, I'm kind of surprised that I wasn't feeling like a bad mom at that point, because it's like, oh, I'm not breastfeeding, I'm not even holding. That day 5 was pretty much the one main day of intense engorgement and pain for me. And so I think I just didn't have the mental capacity to feel like a bad mom, because there was just so much physical stimulation going on that I didn't have the bandwidth to feel like I was not, doing my role as a parent well. So I think I just knew I needed to take care of myself. And after that, and to this day, I haven't leaked. I haven't had any pain. Like, I'm back to normal essentially with my breasts. And so it's really wild to look at the difference of how I felt then and now, and just how quick it was. It was fleeting. I can hold her now all the time, and I basically feel like I turned it off.
Did you think about different feeding options for the baby in addition to formula?
Yeah, I think you have the option of getting breast milk other than formula. I think that we were really into a sustainable organic version of formula that would feel like we were giving her the best that we could find, like the best money could buy. And so it kind of felt like this is the route we're going to take. In the NICU, she was on formula and didn't have any problems with it. And so we ended up going that route and not looking back. So, to this day, almost 4 months old, she's only had formula.
Do you wish that there were other options available?
I don't know. I think there's so much good in breast milk. I mean, that would be cool to look at other options like that and maybe, consider them if I had more information about them. I think it was sort of like, oh, breastfeed or formula. Either I do it or I provide formula. And that kind of seemed like the two options that were there that we were even looking at.
Got it. What would you, I mean, outside of all those things, now you've had a few months postpartum and a few months of mothering. What's that experience been like?
Really wonderful. I think that the scare of birth was, again, fleeting. Like, it was a moment of trauma that we're actually in this health and brain study that I had already opted to join out of the Children's Hospital of LA. So I went when I was pregnant with our baby, and then now have brought her back. So we've had multiple ways that she's been tested, like her brain function after being intubated. And so I currently don't feel like I'm harboring any guilt or pain or anxiety around that. So we've just really been able to enjoy things. I've kind of learned that having a partner that's fully on board is very important. For many weeks, I was able to have a full night's sleep as I was recovering, because that was deemed very important with bipolar I. And so with my family and with my husband, I've had really a village that has been able to support me. My mom, my aunt, and my cousin helping with the night shifts was just incredible. And I feel like it makes me feel tingly inside knowing that I have this team around me.
It's amazing that you have such great support. And I just wonder if that's also a large part of why pregnancy was so enjoyable for you, and also now postpartum. It's really great. The whole journey is really interesting and fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing so openly about bipolar and your experience with it, about lithium and your experience with it. And, I think that probably a lot of people wonder, can I have a pregnancy? Can I have a postpartum? And what would that look like? And you've painted the picture for us. And it's a really beautiful picture in your case. It may not be the same for everyone, but I really haven't had these discussions before, nor have I had a discussion with anyone about how to immediately, stop your milk right after you give birth. So this has been really educational for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope it's not uncharted territory, for others, that they can have resources. I've been able to dig some up, and hopefully it can help someone that's curious about it.
Thanks, Rachel. And at home, thanks for listening to the Informed Pregnancy Podcast. For more pregnancy and parenting information just like this, visit us online at informedpregnancy.com.
Doctor, give me the news. I got